discipline. Discipline in the 60s was a lot different than it is nowadays. You didn't talk to your kids. You know, there was that old adage where you spare the rod and you spoil the child. And because of the fact, growing up, my mother was influenced very strongly by the nuns and the convent and the Catholic Church, okay? And she was very strongly influenced. And, you know, they basically looked upon us as sinners because my mother she was a single mom. And so, you know, we were looked upon as sinners, and we were told to pray and pray for our salvation. And, you know, I think that's the reason why in the 60s I pulled away. Well, not in the 60s. It would have been when I became a young adult. So in the late 70s and 80s, I still believed in the divine. I still do. I have my own religious affiliations and things, but I think I pulled away from that very strict regime that the Catholic Church had because of the way I was raised, and because things were very, very strict in our house. And they were strict. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned before in a video that every single solitary day from the age of 6 till, geez, I don't know, 12, we had to say the rosary every day. Actually, I don't think I was 12. I think from 6 till maybe when I left St. Joseph's School. So 6 to maybe, how old would I have been? 10, maybe 10. I think that strictness that I lived in my life, where you said the rosary every day, you were fearful of the Lord. This wasn't the Lord that was going to accept your sins and your faults. You would be a sinner forever if you didn't follow the Bible and you didn't follow the Catholic Church's strict ethics or values. Okay, you would be a sinner and you would burn in the fires of hell. And I never did agree with that. I never agreed with it. I never believed in it. It was, to me, it was wrong. It was wrong not to be able to be forgiven for your sins, or to be forgiven. Like even the fact that you had you know, a dilemma in your life. I mean, my mother didn't seek becoming a single mother. She didn't go out in the world and decide, okay, I'm going to have a whole bunch of kids and, you know, I'm going to be a single mom. She didn't do that. She didn't do that. And if she did nowadays in 2023, that would be fine. That's like kind of like the mainstream. So, you know, she didn't seek this out. This was something that was kind of like thrust upon her by, you know, the bad relationships or her husband passing away, whatever. I mean, it's not my story to tell. And I wish my mother had told her story so people would understand certain dynamics. But it's not my story to tell. However, the part of it that is my story to tell is the way that the Catholic Church looked upon my mother, and what they taught my mother, and what they encouraged my mother to do as discipline. And this is going to be heart-wrenching for me to say. I'm not going to cry, but it's truth and fact. They encouraged my mother to use a physical form of violence, a physical form of discipline, they called it. I call it violence. I call it abuse. And they encouraged her to do that. And, you know, spare the rod and spoil the child was their adage back in the 1960s. And as I said, at school I would get the belt. And they had a big, thick leather belt if I did anything wrong, because I was a little heathen. I was a little heathen because my mother was a single mom. And so that made me a sinner. That made me a product of a sinner. Right? And so I was a little heathen. And so anything I did wrong, I would get the belt, or I would get the pointer, or I've had my knuckles wrapped so many times, it was unbelievable. I've sat in the corner with a dunce cap on. I've been laughed at. I've been ostracized. I've been pointed out as the class clown, the class fool, the bad girl in class. I've been there. I've been there. I remember this. I remember it clear as day. I do remember one nun who was very, very kind to me and very tender to me. And I'll tell you a story about that nun in a minute. But let's get back to the discipline. And my mother followed their lead. Okay, she followed their lead. Unbeknownst to her, it would affect me many years later. And it actually affected how I raised my children. Now, I was a strict mother. I was. Don't get me wrong. I was strict. I expected my children to heed me. When I told them to go to bed, it was bed. When my kids didn't waste food, I mean, I did. And I learned a lot of that from my mother. And some of it was good and some of it was bad. Now that I find out from my children telling me now that, yeah, Mom, didn't really agree with that, right? But anyhow, so I got something on my lip. Anyhow, so discipline back then was, spare the rod and spoil the child. So my mother got a belt and she used that belt. She used that belt. She used her open hand. I mean, corporal discipline back then was the mainstream. Everybody did it, I thought. That's how I was raised. You were bad, you got a spanking. Simple as that. And I'm sure a lot of people from the 60s did. You'd get taken out behind the barn and you'd get the whip. But I got the belt. I got the belt at school. And my mother, I don't know why things changed, but she stopped using the belt after a while. But the new form of punishment was terrifying. It was terrifying. The new form of punishment was basically, sorry, I gotta turn this up a little bit. Yeah, I'm losing my picture on this. So the new form of punishment was kind of like, do you remember, or do you know, because you can still buy them, the beans, the big white beans that you can buy, that you can purchase? And I know because I buy them. I buy them for soups, but they're big, they're hard, and they're white, right? So my mother, I remember this blue pillow that she had that belonged to, I guess, her husband, her husband that passed. So she had this big blue pillow. So she cut it up. She cut the pillow up, and the lining of the pillow was a blue, and it was a really, really cold material. And I remember my mom using that material to make a bag, and she made these little bags. And in those little bags, she put those white beans. See where I'm taking this? She put those white beans, and she made bean bags. She made bean bags. And when we were bad, and I can only speak for myself, okay, but we all got this. We all got this. It's up to them to tell their story, but this is my story. I remember my mother being angry with me for something that I did. And I don't even know what it was. I mean, it could have been anything. Anything in the slightest where I wasn't listening to her. If I laughed at the wrong time, if I, ate something I wasn't supposed to eat, if I, like, whatever it was, because I don't remember the instances that would have been so bad to warrant this punishment. These bean bags were put on the floor in our it was in the room just before the kitchen. They were put in the corner. In the room where my mother had the poster with all the stars from us saying the rosary, in that room, facing that wall. And in the corner, my mother would put those bean bags. And she made, I think she had two. One for me and one for my sister. Not my story to tell, okay, but my story. So the bean bags were put in the corner on an angle. And if I did anything wrong, I was knelt on those bean bags, bare knees, not with a pair of pants on, but bare knees on those bean bags. And I would have to put my hands above my head in the prayer position as high as I could. Like I would have to stretch them and hold them high. And if I even faltered one time, if those hands fell to the top of my head and I went like this, I would have to kneel on those bean bags longer. I remember kneeling on those bean bags for a little girl, 6 years old, it seemed like forever. It seemed like hours. And I still have problems with my knees. I still have problems with my knees. I have bumps on my knees. I was at the time in my life where my body was forming, where my body was getting stronger, but it affected my knees. I have lumps on my knees from kneeling on those beanbags. And I will tell you this, I was shocked. I was shocked. I'm still shocked how There were some parts of my childhood that were amazing, and there were some parts of my childhood that were just downright cruel. My mother had those beanbags still up until maybe 10 years ago. I remember seeing those beanbags at her home. Do you know anybody 6 years old? Do you know anyone? Try putting your hands above your head for an hour in the same position, stretching them toward the good Lord above, because he doesn't take kindly to heathens. Truly, truly, that was the most cruelest part of my childhood that I can remember. There were a couple other pretty juicy parts, but the punishment that was met upon children back in the day was outrageous. This one particular time, I never got invited to parties because I didn't have a lot of friends. So I had this one particular friend who encouraged me to kind of sneak out. And there was a dance that was taking place. And damn, I can't remember the name of the band, but it was a young band. It was a young band, and I've actually seen the name on Facebook. I actually seen that person who was a member of the band on Facebook. I haven't stalked them, don't worry about that, but I did see their name on Facebook. And it kind of brought back this memory, and I remember them having a party after the dance, and we were invited to go to the party, me and my compatriot, my friend, my, rebel rouser. So we went to it. And I was not supposed to be around alcohol. And I was not supposed to be around a specific group of people because I had to keep my nose clean. I had to keep my reputation clean, spotty. From being spotty, I had to keep it very clean, right? And so I guess I screwed up. And I remember my older brother. I don't know if he's watching this, but one of my older brothers, I won't give specifics, but it was my brother who was a bit of a rebel himself. And so he kind of got the job of coming to get me from this party because someone told my authority figure in my life where I was, and he had the job of coming to get me and bring me home. And he wasn't lackadaisical about it either. He showed up at the door, he knocked, and they weren't going to let him in. And I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there watching everybody else getting shit. And there was nobody putting the moves on me. I was like, I didn't have any boobs. I was flat chested. I had like, a 13-year-old skin or 14-year-old skin. That wasn't like, nobody was looking to pick me up, right? Or to take my innocence. Trust me, no. But I was watching, and I was, interested. Brother shows up at the door, he knocks on the door, they weren't going to let him in. Well, he got in there. He pushed that door open, and he came into that motel room, and he grabbed me, and he dragged me out of that room, and I didn't hesitate with going, because at that point, I wanted to go. I was getting scared. Things were getting a little bit heavy. There were people like getting into the romantic inclinations, and I was just a little girl. I was just interested what a party was like. That's all. It's no big deal, no big deal. I just want to watch. I just didn't want to watch that much. So I remember him dragging me out, and I think he had a Volvo. I think he had a green Volvo, and I remember him putting me in the car. I'm not sure. I think it was the Volvo. And I remember him putting me in the car and taking me home. And wow, when I got through that door, I remember, and I'm not gonna say I was very protective, very, very protective, and I know that that's where it came from. I know that you learn what you're taught, right? You learn what you're taught, and a lot of the times, I didn't have anyone to protect me. My older brother left home, and he went to another country to live for a period of time, and I was kind of left to my own devices. And so as I got older and I got into my own life and my children, I was extremely protective of my children. But my children knew when I raised my voice, if I raised my voice, they knew, okay, that's it now. We have to straighten it up, right? And I had amazing kids. My kids were amazing. Everybody has their own story to tell. And, if there were instances when I raised them that they disagreed with, that's up to them. That's their story to tell, not my story. Because I would never point at my children and say, if my children were telling their story in their way, I would never say, no, that didn't help. We might say it in conversation, but I would never question their view of a circumstance if they're telling their story. Okay, if they say it to me, I might say, nah, you got that the wrong way, right? And a little bit of healthy give and take there, but yeah, corporal punishment back in the 60s was the mainstay. And a lot of us dealt with it. So, you know, I just wanted to kind of tell you that things are different nowadays. Things are different nowadays. The discipline nowadays is more a psychological bent to it, where, I mean, I'm sure there still is corporal punishment going on somewhere in someone's life, and I believe it's wrong. And I believe that anyone that's suffering from that type of situation in their life, that, you know, definitely you need to put a stop to it, because it's not going to teach you anything. It's going to teach you to be angry inside. And for many years, I was an angry young woman, and I let that anger affect me, and that we learned what we were taught. And a lot of the time, you know, that anger would be turned inward and would be turned at ourselves. And so I think that a lot of the people that came from the 60s, you know, the people that perhaps dealt with that type of environment or circumstance, they also dealt with things like addictions. I mean, anger turned inside. Anger at yourself, and you don't know how to deal with that anger. You have no one to talk to about it. You have no one to explain how you felt growing up, or about the things that took place in your life or that happened to you. And so you get angry at yourself for not having the voice or not being able to speak your truth. So this is my video, and this is me speaking my truth about living in the 60s and about the discipline that I seen, that I witnessed, and that I survived in the 60s. So I shall see you in the next video. God be willing. Namaste.